There are a lot of details to be covered, especially when you're trying to recap 4 years worth of work in the Industrial Hemp Pilot Program at the department. But let's go ahead and get started by introducing the team once again, just so you have a face with the names, and Brent Burchett, myself as the manager, and then this program wouldn't be possible without Michelle and Sarah. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the legal update, how we got here, and what it looks like for the future. We'll talk about a program overview. We'll go over some of the numbers that we see in the program and talk about how much it's expanded and what kind of results we're getting back. We'll talk a little bit about the production report information that we've gained just recently. So we still have a lot of new folks in the room. So for those of you that are old hat to this, please bear with me. I'm not going to get extremely detailed, but we are going to hit on some of the highlights of how we got here. So the old news is, as Commissioner mentioned, 2014 Farm Bill, Section 7606, titled The Legitimacy of Industrial Hemp Research. Of course, that's codified as 7 U.S.C. 5940 now. But it did several things, but it is a small piece of legislation. It's 1 page, but it defines industrial hemp. Of course, I'm paraphrasing there. It's much longer than that, but basically it is the plant species Cannabis sativa L. And the only thing that differentiates industrial hemp from the other forms of cannabis is the THC level. That's it, that's all. And it is in federal law. It also allows the universities and departments of agriculture to conduct research under an agricultural pilot program. So that was passed in 2014. Kentucky was one of a couple of states that planted hemp in 2014. A little later in 2016, we had the statement of principles that came out, because those of us who were very interested in growing industrial hemp and managing these pilot programs, we're doing our best to interpret what the Farm Bill meant and how it would apply. Those 3 federal agencies, the USDA, the FDA, and the DEA, came out with the statement of principles to try to provide a little more guidance. Well, it did that, but it also did a few other things. It restricted things. And in our opinion at the Department of Agriculture, it attempted to do some things that were actually contradictory to what was in federal law in the Farm Bill. It tried to redefine industrial hemp, different from what Congress has. The statement of principles actually expands the THC to include isomers, acids, and salts, and that basically would incorporate all of the cannabinoids. So we didn't think that was correct. It also suggests that only grain and fiber are industrial hemp, and that leaves out the floral material, of course, which we did not agree with as well. It also tried to limit the movement of hemp seeds and plants across state lines. It appeared that they were okay with everything else moving across state lines, but not the seeds or the plants. Based on what law was that determined? So that ignored the congressional action that took place with the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2016, where they specifically prohibited the use of federal funds to intervene in 7606 programs and to prevent the transport. So, as far as I know, Commissioner Quarles is the only Commissioner of Agriculture in the entire nation that decided to take action on this. We had a regulatory conference with 37 other states around the country, and they applauded Commissioner Quarles' efforts to write that letter, to point out these problems with the statement of principles, but at the same time they all said, don't ask our commissioner to write that letter, because I don't think it's going to happen. And to our knowledge, it hasn't. But after a year and a half of receiving no response from the federal agencies, another letter has gone out requesting an opportunity for a meeting, a sit down to discuss this, and we've still not received a response, but as you heard from the commissioner earlier, he's committed to continuing to fight for you and to fight for this industry. So now we're going to get into some of the new stuff when it comes to the federal legislation. The Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2018 was signed just a week or so ago, and in that language, it actually strengthens the language to prevent the use of federal funds to interfere with the transport by adding the words "and seeds of such plant." So it's very clear that Congress's intent is to allow for the materials that are produced in one pilot program to move to another pilot program if the need arises. Understand that this does support our interpretation, our program rules and guidelines. The regulations filed here in Kentucky does allow for the movement of seeds and planting material from one state program to another. But it's also important that you remember that states still have the authority to confiscate or to prosecute if there is movement of materials across their state that they don't deem to be legal. So it is still a gray area anytime you're moving anything outside the state of Kentucky. And of course, the commissioner touched on this. We were very excited to host Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell last week to make his big announcement, and the future looks very, very bright. So now we're going to hit a little bit on the state laws. KRS 268.850 to 869. So Senate Bill 218. When we stood before this group, KYHIA conference a year ago, Joe Bilby gave you guys an update about Senate Bill 218 and talked about what it would do. I'm not sure if it had passed the week prior or was up for a vote the next day, but we were right in the thick of things at that point in time last year. And Joe laid out for you guys what this law would do. A year later, we have a state law, makes it very, very clear that the purpose of the research pilot program here in Kentucky is to enable the Department of Agriculture to issue licenses and affiliated universities to study these methods of cultivating, processing, and marketing industrial hemp. Gives KDA clearly the authority to promulgate the administrative regulations. We'll talk about regulations in the next slide. But the section that talks about lawful and unlawful activities, this is the important synopsis that everybody needs to remember. Please help us educate your fellow enthusiasts with regards to industrial hemp, that no person shall cultivate, handle, process, or market industrial hemp in the Commonwealth unless the person holds a hemp license from the KDA. So, can you broker hemp shipments, buy and sell harvested material in the state of Kentucky without a license? You can't. It's very simple to get a license. Applications are available through June 1 for processor handlers. As a broker, you would be considered a handler in the program. So it is important that everyone in the industry be properly licensed, and if there's any questions about how to go about that, always just contact the Department of Ag. This is a separate piece of legislation that passed last year. It was in House Bill 333, and the specific language pertaining to industrial hemp we're going to hit in A, B, and E. So first it says that this is actually exceptions to the marijuana definition. So it's found in KRS 218A. That's the definitions for marijuana is in section 17. And it says the term marijuana does not include A, industrial hemp that's in the possession, custody, or control of someone who holds a license with KDA. Industrial hemp. B, industrial hemp products that do not include living plants, viable seeds, leaf material, or floral material. So any industrial hemp product that doesn't contain those items would be considered a sellable product. And then here, something that gave a lot of people a lot of relief and a lot of confidence, E, a cannabidiol product derived from industrial hemp, as defined in KRS 26850. So it is clear in Kentucky state law that cannabidiol, which most of you know as CBD, of course, as long as it's derived from industrial hemp, is a legal product in Kentucky. Now, we can't speak to the laws of all the other 49 states. We're not an expert in their state laws, but we can assure you that in Kentucky, without a doubt, CBD derived from industrial hemp is legal. Okay, next, the KAR, so our Kentucky Administrative Regulations. As soon as Senate Bill 218 passed to provide that structure in the Kentucky Revised Statute, we spent 8 months writing these regulations. We spent a lot of time meeting together to discuss the best way to move forward, the best way to structure this program. And inevitably, every 2 weeks, there would be more experiences that we had with participants to say, here's another area, here's another problem that someone discovered. So we need to make sure that we clarify that, we figure out how to work with that and how to make that work for our participants. So it was a long, arduous task, but we feel like we hit the nail on the head. I think I, for one, am very confident in the regulations that we've set forth. They were filed in December, adopted in January. If you want to know how the Research Pilot Program in Kentucky is written, read the regulation, because every single minute detail is in there. There are separate regulations for growers versus processors versus the university affiliations. We thought that would be easier for you guys so that you didn't have to wade through all of the regulations if you were simply going to be a broker. You can focus on one set of regulations. We do have a lot of participants that are both licensed growers and licensed processors. All those regulations can be found linked to our website, and they're, of course, live on the LRC website. So some of the things that the regulations do, you notice that they range from 20 to 70 there. We've hit growers is 20, processors are 30, universities are 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. There are others. Those others incorporate the THC testing procedures. That is a separate regulation unto itself. The fee schedule is also a separate regulation. So please know that all of those regulations are available on our website and tell the full story of how we developed those regulations and how this program is set to work for you in the future. So the program operation, we really don't have time on our schedule today to go over all the details of our program. That's obvious. It is important that everybody, whether they're interested in participating or not, do understand that the only legal hemp production in Kentucky is by those who hold a license from the Department of Agriculture in the Industrial Hemp Research Pilot Program. There's an annual application period. Even if you're a processor with a multi-year license, there are lots of annual renewal requirements, and the annual background check is certainly one of those. There's an evaluation and approval process. Those evaluation criteria are very clearly spelled out in those regulations. So it's very easy to determine whether or not your potential application would meet the requirements of the program. Growers and processor licenses. So just a reminder that there's two different types of licenses, and depending on what you intend to do with industrial hemp would dictate which license you would apply for, obviously. Anybody that's interested in participating, please see us today. Again, see Sarah and Michelle at the booth back there. And you are always encouraged to visit our website. Don't have the address there, but there's plenty of brochures in the back that have our website address on it. So one of the main things that we focus on is cooperation with law enforcement. I have no doubt that without the cooperation and the confidence that they place in us to operate this program within the limits of the law, we would not stand a chance of having federal legislation passed if we didn't have that confidence and cooperation from law enforcement. We do collect samples from every single field of industrial hemp grown in the state of Kentucky. Why is it important? We reviewed the definition of industrial hemp a bit earlier. The definition and the difference between hemp and other forms of cannabis lies in one thing, and that's the level of the THC in that field of hemp. So we need to make sure that what we're growing in Kentucky is hemp. As we move forward, we will begin to eliminate varieties that are problematic, so that in the future we will have genetics that is stable and that can reliably test within those legal limits. We have very few tests that do come in above the limit. I should mention that. I don't want to have people to think that it is a huge problem when it's not. But it is important that we maintain this compliance and that we are sampling those fields and making sure that we have legal compliance. So why do you have to test it and not just go out and take a look and inspect it? Can you tell me with certainty if this is industrial hemp? Which one of those pictures are industrial hemp? Well, that's a trick question. Everything in these photos is industrial hemp, but you can't tell by looking at it. You just can't. If every field looked like this, regulation would be much easier, but it doesn't. A lot of the hemp looks like that. If we're going to research all components of the plant, the production methods for those components of the plant, the floral material, is tricky when you're just using visual analysis. That's not acceptable, so we do have to do the analysis. This is what the map looks like for 2018. We're off and running again. As Commissioner Quarles pointed out, we do have 210 licensed growers this year. So this map depicts a green county indicates there's at least one licensed hemp field or greenhouse, one licensed growing location in that county. These red dots indicate the presence of at least one processor in that county. Some of the counties have multiple processors, but only one dot. I'll point out there's multiple processors in Jefferson County. We do have a total of 52 licensed processors in 2018. So there's actually participation in exactly 72 counties this year with license holders and licensed sites. So just a quick look at the entire program from beginning to now, just a few of the numbers. So, well, first, before we go from 2014 all the way down to 2018, let's just look at this one row of numbers, both 2018. So I want to just make sure that everyone understands that all these numbers are fluid. Yes, we only take applications from growers once a year. So you would think, okay, we have 210 licensed growers. It is possible that 6 months from now we don't have 210 licensed growers. We're not going to have more because we're not accepting new applications. But folks decide to withdraw from the program. Folks are terminated from the program. So these numbers will change over time. In January, when we issued the press release after the completion of all the evaluations, here were our numbers. We had 55 approved processors, 225 approved growers, and 12,018 acres that have been approved for production. Between January and when we conducted our orientations at the end of February and the beginning of March, 3 processors decided, probably not a good business decision for this year, I'm not going to move forward with the hemp license this year. We had 15, actually this number went from 225 to 227. We had the appeals process. 2 appeals were granted, so we had 227 approved growers prior to orientation. Once orientations were complete, the licensing agreements were signed, there were 210 of those 227 approved who decided to move forward in the program. Again, just because we approve an applicant doesn't mean they're required to pay participant fees and to move forward with the license. So 17 folks decided against it, and that is perfectly all right. That is their decision. We've now had time to verify 72 counties, and look at this number. It's increased by 2,000 acres. So between the time they turned in their application in the beginning of November until when they signed their licensing agreements at the end of February, those growers in the program had found new opportunities, had requested to increase their acreage by 2,000 acres. So we've received site modifications. I wish we'd have kept track of how many site modifications we processed from January 1 till the end of February, but I would say it was over, I bet it's nearly 100. So lots of folks changed their plans from application time to signing of the licensing agreement. And now we're sitting right at a little over 14,000 acres. And as Commissioner Quarles pointed out, we don't know how many acres will be planted, but I stand here before you and say it will be well beyond what we planted last year. I would be shocked if we don't double. I won't be shocked if we triple the acreage just from last year. So we had humble beginnings with 33 acres. Then in 2015, when we actually accepted applications and evaluated applications across the board, we grew to almost 100 growers and that actual planting of near 1,000 acres of hemp. And that grew gradually to 2017. Last year, there was a planting of 3,200 acres. We get a lot of questions about the difference between this number and that number. And believe it or not, we actually have some data to let you know why people changed their acreage from the time of application until the time of planting. So I'll present that in just a little bit. Looking at what was actually grown in the program. Year one, of course, everybody knows about fiber. Everybody's talked about fiber. That historically, that's what hemp is, right? Fiber. But there's a lot of infrastructure required to get fiber from the field to a finished product. So fiber started off as a third of the crop just because everybody thought that's what it is, that's what we got to grow it for. Then they figured out that, well, I have stalks now. How do I make rope or tarps out of that? Well, there's really not a market for hemp rope and tarps anymore. So, but again, 32%, it was only 3 or 4 acres, 10 acres, so not a big deal. But quickly we saw a change in the percentages and the types of hemp being planted. CBD, or harvest of the floral materials for the extract of primarily CBD, equaled grain the second year, and now it hit 60% in 2016. In 2016, even in the beginning of 2017, when we talked about the production methods of these crops, we would say CBD production is female plants only. They're cloning the transplants. They want no seed. They're harvesting only floral material with no grain. Pollen is their enemy. Look what happened in 2017. We had 32% of the entire crop, which was about 1,000 acres, or a little more than 1,000 acres actually, that was produced for the primary purpose of CBD production, but they also harvested grain off those crops as well. So they said, we're going to give up that nice, clean floral material. We're going to let the seeds be produced in there because during that procedure, we can plant with seeds, we can harvest mechanically. So this production method is much less expensive, and you have a dual purpose harvest. There's some challenges that those folks are working out. How do you separate the seeds from the floral material and not lose something in the process. I have no doubt that they'll work through those things, but this is a mechanically harvested, mechanically planted, mechanically harvested crop, for the most part, not in all cases, as opposed to very, very labor-intensive crop when you're talking about clones and female-only plants. So, looking at the processor production reports, Commissioner Quarles has already presented these numbers to you, and I realized that he probably would, but I really thought it bared repeating. This is phenomenal information. People have been saying for years it's going to do great things, and it's going to have an economic impact in Kentucky. We can now prove that to you. It has made an impact. Last year in 2017, the processors reported paying $7.5 million to Kentucky growers. They likely purchased some material that's not included in here as well. So there are other states that have a pilot program in which they're growing industrial hemp, but have no means to process that. So the processors in Kentucky are often taking materials from other states as well. They reported $25.6 million in capital investments in that 1 year alone. I would be curious to look back on the production reports of the previous 2 years to get a complete number for 3 years running, because that number is going to be huge. 81 full-time jobs created. Remember, these are 1 year numbers. That's not cumulative. That's a 1 year number. Same thing with the gross product sales. $16.7 million in gross product sales in Kentucky, just from the Kentucky processors. A lot of the material, and one of the participants pointed this out to me. He said, you do realize that the majority of the CBD produced in Kentucky is sold wholesale. So think about that. If the majority of the CBD produced in Kentucky by our processors is sold wholesale to other manufacturers that then formulate that into finished product, what was the real end product sales numbers if the majority of this is wholesale? What were those retail numbers? That's some positive information and something that we can be proud of. Something that you can be proud of. You guys are the processors out there buying this material from the farmers and turning it into finished products. So we have a little bit of production data from the farmer side. So look at these numbers. We've got the grains and seeds. We lumped those together. 2016 to 17, a lot of things are holding pretty constant. The number of growers, acres planted went up, acres harvested went up. Our yield is staying pretty constant. We've got to get that up. I'd love to see averages up here with our maximum, wouldn't you? We'll get there. We'll get there. Fiber, we've had a couple more growers, a few more acres. Actually, it's 50% more acres, but we're still under 200. This year's going to be the big jump for the fiber. I'm predicting. I'm making a lot of predictions today. Please don't hold me to all those. Don't come back next year and make fun of me for being wrong. So our average yield, about the same as last year. Max yield, again, max yield is really where we'd love to see our average. Is that right, David? I see, David, more than our... Okay, so we got a lot of work to do, but we'll get there. We'll get there. Floral material for CBD. Growers are up significantly. Acres planted are up. Acres harvested is way up. Our average yield tripled. Is that because they're harvesting more than just the hand-clipped floral material off the top, and they're taking more of the limbs and the whole plant? That's possible. That sure is possible. This is just a comparison of that grain only, floral material only, and then that dual-purpose crop. The amount of grain off of this floral crop was actually a higher yield than the grain-only crop. That I wasn't expecting. And the floral was nearly the same. So this dual-purpose crop of floral material and grain is looking pretty good. What we're not looking at here is what is the percent CBD in those two production models? And so that will determine an ultimate value of the crop, not just sheer weight. So here's the answer to that question. Why 12,000 acres approved and 3,000 acres planted? We asked everybody, why? If you plant fewer acres, why? 42 said it was just a personal business decision. 37, change in demand from processors. 34 said, I registered more just to allow flexibility. 20 said, I registered more fields just to avoid a site modification if I changed my mind. And only 4 planted fewer than approved due to market price. Now remember, these responses don't include the 34 people who decided to plant nothing, because if you don't plant anything, you're not required to submit a production report. So I can never end a presentation without thanking our universities. We can't say enough good things about all the university partners who put their neck on the line and the hard work in the field and in the labs to research this emerging crop, and we appreciate you very much. Not all of these have participating researchers this year, but all of them have participated at some point in time. Of course, the big ones have been with us every year. In closing, I know Commissioner Quarles did an excellent job of bringing you his full message this morning, but just want to reiterate how much he supports this industry, how much he supports each of you, and I want to thank him personally for how much he supports our hemp team in the office and day to day at the Department of Agriculture. So thank you, Commissioner Quarles.